The House will be in order. The prayer will be offered by our guest chaplain, Dr. Gary G. Dole, Faith Baptist Church, Altoona, Pennsylvania.
Let us pray. Our Heavenly Father and God, we thank you for receiving us through the work of your Son, the Lord Jesus Christ, on the cross. We also thank you for the many blessings you have showered upon this great nation. Today, I thank you for those you have brought into this great chamber to represent the citizens of our country and to advance the American ethic laid firm by the faith of our founders. May you guide, direct, enable, and strengthen Speaker Johnson and each member of this body in the path of unity that will bring lasting peace and prosperity to this nation we all love. I pray that by your grace, you will enlighten each representative with your wisdom that will maintain America as a bastion for peace and freedom around the world for generations to come. These things I pray in the name of your Son and our Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen.
The chair has examined the Journal of the Last Days Proceedings and announces to the House the approval thereof. Pursuant to Clause 1 of Rule 1, the Journal stands approved. The Pledge of Allegiance will be led by the gentlewoman from Pennsylvania, Ms. Steen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Without objection, the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Joyce, is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to introduce the pastor of the Faith Baptist Church of Altoona, Pennsylvania, and the president of the Way of Truth Ministries, Pastor Gary Dole. Pastor Dole has been preaching the gospel since he was 12 years old, and by the time he was a senior at the Washington Bible College, Pastor Dole was already preaching at the Morningside Baptist Church in Suitland, Maryland, right outside of Washington, D.C. Since then, Pastor Dole has had an incredible life. He has served at 4 churches in Pennsylvania and Florida and is currently in his 29th year as the pastor of the Faith Baptist Church of Altoona. Pastor Dole also founded the Way of Truth Ministries, which has missionaries on 3 continents. Pastor Dole has evangelized by preaching the gospel and serving those in need in 25 different countries. Pastor Dole has devoted his life to spreading the word of the Lord and serving those less fortunate. Whether in his community or throughout the world, he has embodied the selfless service of Jesus Christ, his Savior. It is a privilege to welcome Pastor Gary Dole and his wife of 50 years, Nancy, to Washington to open the floor of the United States House of Representatives in prayer. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields. The chair will entertain up to 5 further requests for 1-minute speeches on each side of the aisle. For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, request unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, and the gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today in recognition of National Homeownership Month, a time to celebrate the cornerstone of the American dream. For generations, owning a home has symbolized stability, independence, and opportunity. It strengthens families, builds communities, and lays the foundation for long-term financial security. But today, that dream feels out of reach for too many, especially first-time buyers, young families, and those in rural and working-class communities. Rising interest rates, limited housing supply, and increasing costs are making it harder for Americans to put down roots. That's why we must work together across the aisle to support policies that expand access to affordable housing, invest in infrastructure, and reduce regulatory barriers that drive up costs. Home ownership shouldn't be a luxury. It should be an achievable goal for every hardworking American. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The United States airstrikes in Iran, which we hope to be briefed on today, is the latest in the signature chaos and erratic decision-making from the Trump White House. I thank God our extraordinary military appears to have exquisitely executed its mission. We can be grateful to our military's carrying out of a decision while asking questions about that decision. Yet while the news is inundated with reports of Trump's airstrikes, there are many concerns we are not hearing about here at home. Hostages, Ukraine, federal institutions like USAID and the NIH gutted, the big ugly bill that would slash Medicaid for 14 million Americans, including 110,000 of my constituents, the cruel cuts at SAMHSA that will jeopardize the lives of those struggling with addiction and mental health. The Trump White House leads with smoke and mirrors, but they are doing incredible harm to my constituents and to Americans across this country. I call upon my colleagues to not let them be successful in their attempts to obscure and distract. Jefferson said, when injustice becomes law, resistance becomes duty. Resist. I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Mississippi seek recognition?
Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to honor an extraordinary American and a proud son of South Mississippi, Lieutenant Colonel Boyd Mason, for his nearly 3 decades of distinguished service to our country. Lieutenant Colonel Mason served with courage and honor, including 2.5 years doing active duty in Vietnam War. His dedication to our nation didn't end with his military service. He continues to be a guiding light in Jackson County and all across South Mississippi's 4th Congressional District. Today, Mr. Mason faces a new battle. Battle this time is a personal one, fight against cancer. Yet his strength and spirit remain unshaken. He is a devoted father of 5, grandfather to 12, great-grandfather to 5 more. His legacy of service, faith, and perseverance reaches far beyond the battlefield. It lives on in the lives touched and the freedoms he helped defend. While our military members risk their lives every day for the sake of our great country, it's more important than ever to honor those who answered the call. Lieutenant Colonel Mason is a hero, plain and simple, and I ask all Americans to join me in keeping him and his family in our thoughts and prayers. And Mr. Speaker, we honor Lieutenant Colonel Mason today. And with that, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from North Carolina seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask for unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute for cause and extent.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to recognize John Walston, affectionately known as Bus Dad. After an impressive 51 years behind the wheel of a school bus dedicated to transporting exceptional children within Wilson County Public Schools, Mr. Walston has recently entered a well-deserved retirement. Mr. Walston was more than just a school bus driver. He was devoted to his students and their families. He warmly welcomed each child on his bus every morning, making sure they were ready for school. His bus was more than just a mode of transportation, it was a safe haven. Mr. Walston's dedication exemplifies a great American story highlighting the essence of public service, impactful, consistent, and full of love and compassion. Mr. Walston, thank you for your extraordinary commitment to your students over the decades. Your legacy will remain with those who you've touched, and we wish you a wonderful retirement. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, to address the body for 1 minute without objection.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, today I rise to once again stress the need for immigration reform in this country. Just last week, back home, one of my taxpayer constituents, Narciso Barranco, was picked up by, I believe, are ICE agents. They were masked, and is now sitting in an ICE facility, holding facility in Los Angeles. Videos show him punched by masked federal agents unprovoked. He's lived in my district for 25 years or more, and not a traffic ticket to his name. More importantly, he has 3 sons. 3 sons, all serving in the U.S. Marine Corps. You know, we make movies of families like this. 3 sons ready to make the ultimate sacrifice for this great nation, and instead, he's being held in custody in an ICE facility in Los Angeles. Our federal agents should be taking criminals off our streets, not gentlemen like this. I pray that Mr. Barranco's case is a wake-up call for all of us for immigration reform. Mr. Speaker, I yield.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Rhode Island seek recognition?
I ask to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today for the 26th time to call on the Trump administration to honor its word and restore funding for life-saving food aid around the world. You know, the words from the Trump administration have been pretty good on this. Elon Musk said that funding for emergency food aid will be restored. Marco Rubio has repeatedly said he was going to do it. They even got Fox News to write a glowing online article about their plans to restore funding. But it's been 6 months since they cut this funding off. 6 months. And every day that they wait is another day that children die of starvation unnecessarily. Every day, there are children whose organs are shutting down, who are unable to eat conventional food and can only have their lives saved by ready-to-use therapeutic food manufactured in the United States. Every day, the clock is ticking. The administration needs to do what it said it's going to do, restore funding for this aid, and I will continue to stand on this floor every day until they do. I yield back.
The gentleman yields. The chair lays before the House the following enrolled bill.
H.R. 2215, an act to redesignate the Salem Maritime National Historic Site as the Salem Maritime National Historic Park and for other purposes.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California, Mr. Kiley, seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, pursuant to House Resolution 530, I call up House Resolution 516 and ask for its immediate consideration in the House.
The clerk will report the title of the resolution.
House Resolution 516, resolution condemning the violent June 2025 riots in Los Angeles, California.
Pursuant to House Resolution 530, the resolution is considered read. The resolution shall be debatable for 1 hour, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Judiciary or their respective designees. The gentleman from California, Mr. Kiley, and the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Raskin, each will control 30 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Kiley.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and to insert extraneous material on House Resolution 516.
Without objection.
I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
A couple weeks ago, the entire world witnessed horrifying scenes out of Los Angeles. Molotov cocktails and bricks being thrown at officers, Waymo cars being lit on fire, American flags being burned, roadways being blocked. Today, we will stand as a House to condemn these acts of violence and to condemn the irresponsible politicians who refused to adequately address them. I think it's important to understand from the beginning the events leading to these horrific scenes. We should first recognize that ICE was undertaking operations in Los Angeles that have been very standard across administrations, Democrat or Republican. President Obama, after all, carried out millions of deportations. And the priority has always been to focus on those who have a criminal record and who pose a risk to the public. That is precisely what ICE was doing in Los Angeles. Among those targeted were murderers, pedophiles, and drug traffickers. It should also be recognized that one of the reasons that some of these people had to be sought out in the community is that the city of Los Angeles and the state of California have chosen to enact sanctuary policies that explicitly forbid ICE from taking custody of these dangerous individuals in the safest and least disruptive setting, in a custodial setting, that is, in jails. That is the explicit purpose of our sanctuary laws. So despite these facts, as these operations were being carried out in a standard and targeted way in Los Angeles, you had certain politicians who engaged in inflammatory rhetoric, and you then had individuals gather to disrupt the activities of ICE and our federal officers, and then you saw these extreme and horrifying acts of violence. Now, I want to be very clear. I will defend in any way that I can the right to assemble and protest, regardless of the content of what the protesters are advocating. This is foundational. It is fundamental to the American system of government. But violence is another matter entirely. This is not just a matter of protest crossing a line. Violence is the antithesis of protest. It seeks to shut down the process of deliberation, argument, and debate. It seeks to exalt force over reason. It is an abandonment of the American experiment of self-government. And by the way, this is especially true when the very purpose of the violence is to impede the policies of a duly elected president from being carried out. It is to say that a violent agitator should be able to overthrow, through force, the will of a democratic majority that has been established through a democratic, free, and fair election. That is what we bore witness to in Los Angeles. And yet, instead of doing everything possible to restore order, to protect the citizens of Los Angeles, to protect our law enforcement officers and our federal officers, you saw certain irresponsible, vainglorious politicians in California decide that this was their star-making moment, where they would egg on the violent agitators, where they would try to pick a fight in every way they could with the president, even going so far as to file a frivolous lawsuit that was thrown out unanimously by the Ninth Circuit. And worst of all, these politicians decided to place the blame for the violence on our incredible National Guard members, somehow saying it was their presence there that caused it. This is deeply offensive, and our National Guard members are owed an apology. So today, I hope that we can stand together, Republicans and Democrats, in making it very clear that protest and assembly are fundamental rights in this country, and that acts of violence are a grave threat to those rights. Specifically, this resolution recognizes the right to assemble and protest peacefully, condemns unequivocally the violence perpetrated against federal, state, and local law enforcement, calls on local and state elected leadership to work with the federal government to end the violent riots and restore peace, and expresses gratitude to law enforcement officers, including the Los Angeles Police Department, Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department, California Highway Patrol, Orange County Sheriff's Department, and other local, state, and federal law enforcement agencies, including the United States Immigration and Customs Enforcement, for keeping our communities safe in the face of danger. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I yield as much time as she might consume to the chair of the California Democratic delegation, Ms. Lofgren, who leads the 45 Democrats in the California delegation.
The gentlelady from California is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I oppose the Kim resolution. Now, had it just condemned violence and thanked the National Guard and the Marines who did not ask for this assignment, I think we'd all be on board. Instead, the resolution really is engaging in partisan games with misleading and inflammatory provisions. You know, Trump said he was going to go arrest and deport violent criminals. People are okay with that. Instead, armed, masked ICE agents, some refusing to identify themselves, aggressively and in some cases even violently, took down day workers at Home Depot, busboys, gardeners, a union leader. And regular people in Los Angeles objected to that. And as the First Amendment provides, they peacefully protested against it. Unfortunately, there were some hooligans and rowdies who infiltrated that group, and they committed violent acts and vandalism, and for that, they should be prosecuted. They should be brought to justice and condemned, which we do. However, the resolution really creates a misleading picture of what happened. On the first page, it says, whereas these protests quickly escalated into violent riots across Los Angeles, where acts of arson, widespread looting, property destruction, lighting streets on fire. Well, the fact is that these demonstrations were largely confined to about a 10-block area of downtown Los Angeles. The police, LAPD, had the situation under control, and there's an elaborate system of mutual aid in California. Had they needed additional forces, it was readily available under mutual aid. I would like to point out to my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, in case they need a reminder, LA County is 4,060 miles, square miles, not the 10 blocks. So when President Trump deployed the Marines and National Guard in LA, it was not at the request of local officials, the chief of police or the governor. It was unprecedented, unnecessary, and a clear attempt to take over the state's law enforcement authority. In fact, I think it did aggravate tensions in the area. Now, the National Guard remains in Los Angeles to this day. They have nothing to do. We heard a report from the former commander that less than 20% are doing anything, and they've been taken away from jobs where they were needed. For example, helping in efforts to prevent forest fire prevention and the like. You know, as the elected chair of the California Democratic delegation, I was proud to join my colleague, Ms. Barragan, in introducing a resolution that, unlike this one, is based in fact. Our resolution condemns the president's authoritarian response to First Amendment expressions of dissent. Unlike the Kim resolution, it expresses support for law enforcement and for the National Guard and for the Marines, and it condemns violence by those who committed it. Now, why is this important? You know, in the resolution, it's so partisan. It says, whereas California's leadership has prioritized protecting illegal immigrants and violent individuals over United States citizens. That is absurd. That is insulting to our elected officials, but it's right in keeping with what the president has said. He has indicated publicly he intends to target cities and states that are democratically elected, that have Democrats elected in government. What a strange thing to say. The executive order that nationalized the California National Guard applies to anywhere in the United States. It's not just LA, it's not just California. I think this resolution really, and false as it is serving as a predicate, as a foundation for the military to be used in places all over the United States at any pretext, so that the military can go in and assume civilian authority away from those who are democratically elected. That's why it's important that we do not approve this resolution with its false whereases, that we do not participate in a scheme to replace the democratically elected officials in cities and counties and states across the United States. I'll just end with this. Who should we be more concerned about? What should we be more afraid of? The gardeners that are being arrested by ICE, the busboys, the farm workers, or the concept that the administration may be taking the steps to replace with the military civil authority that has been duly elected around the United States. With that, Mr. Raskin, I yield back.
The gentlelady yields. And the gentleman reserves. The gentleman from California is recognized.
Just to make sure that we're dealing with the facts as they actually occurred, the assertion that LAPD had the situation under control, we all saw otherwise on our television sets, and the LAPD chief himself said that every person in Los Angeles should be disgusted by what occurred. The governor has himself in the past recognized the virtue of using the National Guard when you had situations that required reinforcement. This notion that somehow the president was taking over the state's law enforcement authority, the Ninth Circuit said otherwise unanimously, even a Biden-appointed judge saying this was the president was exercising his authority to prevent the disruption of the enforcement of federal law. As to this notion that the violence was largely confined to downtown LA, I can't agree with the assertion that it's somehow less objectionable to have violence occur within a concentrated area than on a more diffuse basis. And finally, this disparagement of our ICE officers for wearing masks. I think that this is outrageous. We have seen threats against our ICE officers absolutely skyrocket. And it's very ironic for folks that had no problem forcing 2-year-olds to wear masks all day in defiance of even the World Health Organization's guidelines, are now somehow objecting to federal officers who feel the need to do this in order to protect themselves and their family. I yield 4 minutes to the representative from California, Ms. Kim.
The gentlelady from California is recognized.
Thank you, Representative Kiley, for yielding. I rise in strong support of House Resolution 516 to condemn the violent riots in Los Angeles this month, and I want to thank our brave law enforcement officers. And I appreciate the heated debate and the conversation, and I want to thank my colleague, Representative Kiley, for leading the groundwork for explaining what led to the events that occurred last month in Los Angeles, which explains that the federal agents were conducting immigration enforcement according to the law. Mr. Speaker, protecting public safety should not be controversial. This resolution, therefore, we made it very simple. It recognizes the right to assemble and protest peacefully, and it condemns unequivocally the violence perpetrated against federal, state, and local law enforcement. It calls on local and state elected leadership to work with the federal government and restore peace. And it expresses gratitude to our local, state, and federal law enforcement officers for bravely keeping our communities safe in the face of danger. That's what this is about. Do you stand with our law enforcement officers working to keep our communities safe and have the common sense to call out rioters who commit vandalism, violence, property damage, and other crimes in our streets? Mr. Speaker, like others in the chamber and many across this country, I am an immigrant who came here legally in pursuit of the opportunities that this country provides. I am proud to be an American, and I am paying it forward to keep the American dream alive for my children and grandchildren. Peaceful protests are a constitutional right. We all cherish that. And our communities should not be living in fear. But peaceful protest and freedom of assembly
gave way to chaos in Los Angeles we witnessed a few weeks ago. We saw acts of arson, looting, property destruction, vandalism, blocking streets and highways, lighting cars on fire, shooting fireworks, throwing rocks at law enforcement vehicles, and even assaulting federal and local police officers. As a result, we saw more than 500 rioters were arrested, and at least a dozen LAPD officers were injured. Local and state leadership clearly could not contain the chaos. The riots have cost at least $30 million to pay overtime and repair property damages to city buildings. This doesn't include the small businesses and other private entities whose businesses fell victim to the destruction. We also know that the riots were enabled by California's soft-on-crime policies that have allowed for lawlessness and endangered public safety. Again, this resolution recognizes the right to assemble and protest peacefully, condemns the violence against law enforcement, and calls on local and state officers to work with the federal government to restore peace, and we want to thank our law enforcement. This is not controversial. Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back to the gentleman from California. The gentleman reserves. Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm now happy to yield 3 minutes to the distinguished gentleman from California, Representative Correa.
The gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask, what happened? My hometown, Santa Ana, California, predominantly Hispanic Latino. Factory workers live there. Remember, we're the biggest manufacturing state in the union. Nearshoring. Guess where it's happening? Largest ag state in the union. A lot of farm workers in my district. What happened? One day, we're going about our business in Santa Ana, Orange County. Masked federal agents start going into our neighborhoods, picking up hard-working neighbors. Oh yeah, you bet people were concerned, scared, and nervous. And a lot of people expressed their First Amendment right. We got the National Guard. Sheriff Don Barnes, Orange County Sheriff Don Barnes, did not call for the National Guard. Local police chiefs did not call for the National Guard. We get the National Guard. You know, President Trump promised to deport criminals, those with deportation orders, those here less than 2 years. But now it's hard workers, people that pay taxes, that are being picked up. Like 60% of those being picked up are now people without criminal records. Orange County, we didn't have any violence. We had masked officers coming into our neighborhoods. And you know, I bet President Trump would want to know what's going on Main Street. One of the constituents that just got picked up, I talked about a minute ago, Narciso Barranco, 25 years in the U.S., a gardener, a father of 3 Marines. We make movies of people like this. This gentleman is a hero. His family's a hero. Instead, he's in a nice holding facility in Los Angeles. But I'm hearing more stories coming, more Barranco-type families being broken up, military families being separated by their loved ones by ICE. I do not believe President Trump would want his legacy to be that he deported military family members like Mr. Barranco. Look, common sense here. This resolution is not prime time for a vote. A lot of inaccuracies. I'm going to ask my colleagues to vote no on this measure. Mr. Chairman, Speaker, I yield.
The gentleman from California yields back to the gentleman from Maryland.
Mr. Speaker, I'm moved by the comments of the distinguished gentleman from California, and I wonder what our colleagues think the value is, other than of a purely political nature, to a resolution that purports to be honoring law enforcement when it's set up on a completely partisan basis. I wonder what the value of that is. I especially wonder about what the value of that is when the majority doesn't even stand by actual law when it comes to honoring law enforcement. Because this body, on March 15th, 2022, passed a resolution to put up a plaque, a simple plaque to honor the noble and brave police officers who battled for 4 or 5 hours to stop a violent riot and insurrection unleashed against this chamber and against the Senate in an attempt to overthrow a presidential election. And so we voted to erect a plaque in their honor. That was on March 15th, 2022. It was supposed to have been put up on March 15th, 2023. We're now more than 2 years overdue in honoring those police officers, 140 of whom were wounded, injured, disfigured, and many of them permanently disabled. And several lost their lives in the days to follow that atrocity attack on this body. There's a law which says put up the plaque, and Speaker Johnson and the majority will not put the plaque up, which is why when you walk in the House office buildings now, everywhere, there are poster replicas of that plaque being put up. Now they want to pass a resolution deploring violence that took place thousands of miles away from here, and it's just a resolution, a hortatory resolution. They can't even get bipartisan support because, of course, they've got to set it up on a polemical partisan basis instead. What is the utility of that resolution when they won't even follow an actual law to honor police officers who put themselves between us and a bloodthirsty mob? And that's not a partisan point because the Republicans denounced it at that time as terrorism, as an attack on this institution, as intolerable, as unacceptable. And I'm happy to share with my colleague, who I know wasn't in Congress at the time, all of the statements made by Republican leaders at that time, begging Donald Trump to send in the National Guard, which he controlled because of the District of Columbia National Guard, and he didn't do it. He sat and he watched it, eating hamburgers or whatever in the White House on TV, ignoring all of the appeals to send the National Guard to come and defend Republican and Democratic members of Congress. And now we've got a law which says put the plaque up in honor of these officers, and they can't do it, but they want to bring a totally partisan resolution to the floor deploring violence thousands of miles away, and you've got members of Congress from California saying that they're not capturing what actually happened there. But no, it's got to be another opportunity for partisan division. Why? Why can't we honor law enforcement together and follow through on our word? I'll reserve.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from California is recognized.
As to the comments of my colleague from California, he set forth his view as to what the priority and the limitations ought to be when it comes to deportation policy. And he is, of course, acting appropriately in doing so. That is his right and his prerogative as a member of Congress, as it is for any citizen. This resolution does not have anything to do with the merits of his view. This resolution simply states that one should not use violence in order to advance that view. I would hope that this should be a principle we should be able to agree on a bipartisan basis. And as to my colleague from Maryland's claim that this resolution is somehow set up in a partisan way, nothing could be further from the truth. The resolution simply condemns acts of violence. We are opposed to sanctuary policies. We're opposed to putting a target on the back of our federal officers and, frankly, to defunding the police. And it's not our fault that those who have allowed this violence, who have promoted sanctuary policies, who have put a target on the back of our officers, who have called for the defunding the police, all happen to belong to one party. I yield 3 minutes to my colleague from California, Mr. McClintock.
The gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, many Democrats in this House have called the LA riots peaceful, even while Americans watched with their own eyes as marauding mobs under foreign flags set cars on fire, threw concrete blocks at police, terrorized motorists, and vandalized and looted local shops. The Democrat vice mayor of Cudahy has called on criminal street gangs to attack federal law enforcement. The Democrat mayor of Los Angeles said that for the riots to stop, the federal government had to stop enforcing federal immigration law. You just heard the same sentiment expressed on this floor a few minutes ago. The Democrat Newsom administration has paid millions of taxpayer dollars to one of the principal organizers of these riots. I have news for the Democrats. The doctrine of nullification died with the Confederacy. States are not permitted to obstruct the enforcement of federal law. In a humiliating slapdown of Mr. Newsom, even the notoriously liberal Ninth Circuit Court ruled that the president has clear authority to federalize the National Guard to restore order whenever state or local officials are derelict in their duty to protect the public and enforce the law. Now remember how all of this started. ICE agents attempted to execute court-ordered warrants on criminal illegal aliens. When a mob intervened, ICE called for local law enforcement. The mayor reportedly stopped them from responding, and the governor did nothing. Now, we saw during the George Floyd riots what happens when leftist officials refuse to counter violent mobs. American cities aflame, billions of dollars of damage, and 19 people killed. This resolution condemns the violence, but there is something far more sinister afoot that strikes at the very foundation of a constitutional republic, the rule of law. As Abraham Lincoln told the Democrats long ago, there is no grievance that is a fit object of redress by mob law. And this generation of Americans is taking note. I yield back.
The gentleman from California yields back to the gentleman from California.
I reserve.
The gentleman from California reserves. The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to hear my colleague invoke Abraham Lincoln and the rejection of disunion, secession, and violent attack on the federal government. Neither of my colleagues who's on the floor has said a word explaining why they won't put the plaque up to honor hundreds and hundreds of police officers on the Capitol Police Force, on the Metropolitan Police Department and the Montgomery County Police throughout the region who came to defend us. Why won't they put the plaque up if they're really such big supporters of the police? That's a law. They just want to pass a resolution. Their resolution, of course, is completely political. One of their whereas clauses is, whereas California's leadership has prioritized protecting illegal immigrants and violent individuals over U.S. citizens. That's just defamation of the law enforcement officials in California. It is defamation against the governor of California, the mayor of Los Angeles, the sheriff in Los Angeles County, the chief of police in LA, all of whom fought to put that violence down when riots broke out. Something Donald Trump never did when the riots broke out that he incited against us. And remember, he was impeached by this body for inciting a violent insurrection against us. So not only did he not do anything to defend us, he was the one who caused the whole chain of events that led to the deaths that took place that day, the violence that took place that day. And my colleague won't utter a word about it. He won't say a word about it. And, so all of the attempt to focus everybody over there is a distraction from the fact that they still to this day are defending what Donald Trump did with January 6th. And why? Because they also defend his lie that he won the 2020 presidential election, which he lost by more than 7 million votes, 306 to 232 in the Electoral College. So I don't know what the meaning of their totally partisan resolution is when they won't even stand by the law that it was signed into law by the president to put a plaque up, a simple plaque up honoring police officers who fought tooth and nail for hours against the most bloody, vicious, violent insurrectionist mob ever to attack the Capitol of the United States. I'm going to recognize the distinguished gentlelady from California, Ms. Chu, for 2.5 minutes.
The lady from California is recognized, but before that, the chair would remind the body that members are reminded to refrain from engaging in personalities toward the president. The lady is recognized.
I rise in opposition to this extremely partisan resolution that seeks to legitimize President Trump's baseless attacks in Los Angeles and on our elected leaders, including Governor Newsom and Mayor Bass. This administration's mass ICE raids by masked agents that will not identify themselves have trampled on our rights and left our community shaken, but not defeated. The president manufactured a crisis in Los Angeles and then blamed our constituents for it. He induced ICE to terrorize our community, detaining hundreds of hardworking residents at places like Home Depot and car washes, including U.S. citizens like Job Garcia, a doctoral student in my district, the Claremont Graduate University, who was manhandled, thrown to the ground, and handcuffed. And for this, the president called in the National Guard and Marines? This resolution only gives credence to Trump's dangerous rhetoric. Instead, we should be considering the resolution introduced by California's Democratic delegation, which condemns anyone engaged in violation of the law, violence, or vandalism, but most importantly, stands up for our constitutional rights to due process and free expression, and shows our appreciation to local law enforcement for upholding public safety. Rather than feed into the president's cruelty, we are standing up for the communities we were elected to represent.
Well, and I thank the gentlelady.
So the gentlelady yields back to the gentleman. The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the gentlelady for her excellent point. And the California delegation has advanced with Ms. Lofgren a truly bipartisan resolution that deplores all violence, because the political violence is getting out of control in America. We just had colleagues in Minnesota who were the subject of assassination attempts, and of course the former Speaker of the Minnesota House was killed along with her husband, and a state senator was wounded along with his wife. So we deplore all the political violence across the board, and we defend the right to speak. And we look for policies from the federal government that will not exacerbate conflict, but will reduce conflict. This resolution, far from being nonpartisan, as my distinguished colleague argues, in fact, attacks the governor of California, it attacks members of Congress, it attacks California leadership, it attacks the mainstream media. I mean, come on. We know the difference between what is a partisan gotcha resolution and a resolution that actually attempts to unify people around common values. I'll reserve.
The gentleman reserves, and members, for information, the minority party has 12 minutes left in debate. The majority party has 15 minutes left in debate. The gentleman from California is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, this notion that the president manufactured a crisis is simply asking us not to believe our eyes. You've actually had members of Congress from California who said that there was no violence, even though we all saw on television cars being lit on fire, Molotov cocktails and bricks being thrown at officers, among many other acts of violence. We had several officers who were injured during the process. And what did the president do? He asked our dedicated National Guard members to come in to protect federal property, to protect federal officers. To say that this somehow was what caused the crisis is not only completely at odds with the facts as we all witnessed them, but is incredibly offensive to our dedicated National Guard members who went there and have successfully managed to keep the peace. Now, as to my colleague from Maryland, who has now accused us of defamation with this clause, whereas California's leadership has prioritized protecting illegal immigrants and violent individuals over United States citizens, that is simply the very purpose of a sanctuary law, be it California's sanctuary state law or Los Angeles' sanctuary city law. The entire purpose of these laws, their explicit effect, is to provide special protection for those who have not only come into the country illegally, but have committed crimes. I'll give you an example of how sanctuary policies work in practice. We had a case not far from Sacramento where there was an individual who was in police custody for assaulting a peace officer. He had been arrested. He was in custody. This was during the Biden administration, by the way. ICE saw that he was in custody, and they asked to take custody of him from the sheriff's office so that he could be deported. But the sheriff's office had to say, no, sorry, we're not allowed to do that under the sanctuary state law. The next week, that man murdered his own 3 daughters as well as their chaperone, a horrific crime that never would have happened if not for California's sanctuary policies. And in a similar vein, many of the operations which ICE conducted in a targeted and standard way in LA would have been unnecessary if it were not for a sanctuary policy that forbade them from taking custody of these individuals within a custodial setting. So I would simply ask my colleague from Maryland, are we to take it from his remarks that he would support reversing the sanctuary policies that have caused so much harm in California and Los Angeles? I reserve.
The gentleman from California reserves. The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My colleague from California talks about defunding the police, and he might want to update his talking points, because look who's defunding the police. President Trump and the Republicans are defunding the police, and we know that because we debated it for hours on this floor. His Doge agents, back when Elon Musk was still in town before he got run out of town by somebody, Doge sent a guy into the Department of Justice who cut out an estimated $500 million in community project funding to police departments across America and victim rights organizations and others receiving those grants. And they've not been able to explain it. They didn't even know it was happening. But of course, they unleashed Doge on the Department of Justice, and hundreds of millions of dollars in state and local law enforcement, victim assistance, rape survivor organization grants. All of that was cut by them. And of course, they're also cutting more than $1 billion in law enforcement funding in the DOJ appropriation this year. So we don't need any lectures about defunding the police from people who are actively defunding the police and people who are refusing to follow the law in honoring the police. And my friend from California refuses to utter a word about that. Could somebody please explain why they're not following the law and putting a plaque up to honor the officers who came to save our lives? On January 6th, I'm honored to yield 2 minutes to the distinguished gentlelady from California and member of the Judiciary Committee, Ms. Kamlager-Love.
The gentlelady from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in fierce opposition to this performative and misleading resolution that reads like a cheap script treatment looking for a second-rate director. H.R. 516 is not about public safety. It is about fear. It is about scapegoating immigrants, and it is about gaslighting the American people into believing that Los Angeles is some so-called hellscape. If it is such a hellscape, I want to know why Republican members of Congress have been flying into Los Angeles over the past few weeks attending fundraisers. Nobody's showing up in a hazmat suit or in combat gear. So, if it is such a hellscape, pull back the cameras, release the drone footage so we can see what is happening across the entire city. This resolution ignores the fact that the violence didn't start in a vacuum. It was sparked by the Trump administration's provocative, aggressive immigration raids across the state. ICE agents were in neighborhoods, in grocery stores, at churches. You know, I've never seen a segment on TV about an MS-13 cartel boss in the 3rd grade. That's what we're seeing. And of course, we came out and protested. That is what democracy looks like. And of course, our communities are terrified across Los Angeles, across the state, across the country. But instead of listening to us, people from LA, the president escalated this drama, deploying the National Guard and the Marines to Los Angeles without a request from local law enforcement, the governor, or the mayor. Why? To launch a pathetic, made-for-TV reality TV show to justify authoritarian crackdowns and to divert from the real violence, the violence of cutting $880 billion from Medicaid, the violence of kicking people off of health care, the violence of tanking our economy into the gold toilet. That is what we should be talking about, and that is what this president doesn't want us to talk about. So he turned the cameras and the manufactured, fabricated violence onto Los Angeles. And then we have the audacity.
Just a moment. Does the gentleman wish to yield additional time?
Yes, an additional 30 seconds. Thank you.
The gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And now this is audacity in blaming local leaders. This is about optics and power and control and stoking the ego of Republicans and King Daddy. We are tanking the California economy, the fourth largest economy in the world, largest donor state. I refuse to support this resolution, and I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back to the gentleman from Maryland.
We reserve. Thank you.
Gentleman from Maryland reserves. The gentleman from California is recognized.
This is really an odd notion that we've heard repeatedly, that the violence was only concentrated in part of LA and we needed to zoom in and look at the city as a whole. For the folks who had to deal with this chaos in downtown LA, it's a little comfort to them that things might have been more serene in Beverly Hills. My colleague from California uses the term hellscape for LA. I'm not sure I would use that term, but I can tell you LA has had a lot of problems, so much so that the sheriff's department even had to come out and tell folks, don't wear your jewelry when you go outside. Just put it on after you get to your destination. And as to the assertion that somehow this is a made-for-TV spectacle created by the president, ask yourself, what made for more sensational TV images? The Waymos being set on fire, the Molotov cocktails being thrown at officers, which is to say the things that happened before the National Guard got there, or our dedicated National Guard members standing outside federal buildings making sure that no further damage to property and life occurred? I reserve.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
The gentleman from California has engaged in a spirited defense of the immigration policies of the administration. I wonder if he would clarify for us what the policy is this week, or at least today, with respect to agriculture in California or any other state, because President Trump heard from the Secretary of Agriculture and large agrarian interests saying that his immigration policies were destroying agriculture in America by getting rid of tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people who work there, and they're disrupting the entire agricultural economy. Then Donald Trump announced that there were some very fine, good workers within the agriculture sector, and they would not be enforcing the law there, and that lasted for several days. Then there was a reversal, and they went back to saying, yes, we will be doing ICE immigration crackdowns again. Then Donald Trump heard again from the agriculture secretary, as I understand it, and other interests, and he said, no, they would be leaving some of these people alone. I wonder if the gentleman could clarify that for us, and I wonder whether it causes him to second guess in any way his absolute support for these policies. Maybe it suggests there's something wrong with what they're doing, and the administration could go back to the drawing board. I yield 2 minutes to the very distinguished gentlelady from California, Representative Barragan.
Gentlelady from California is recognized.
Thank you, Ranking Member Raskin. I rise in opposition to this partisan and misleading resolution under consideration. We've heard our colleague distort the facts already through this debate. I want to remind the American people and everybody, it was local law enforcement that got the situation under control before the National Guard showed up, before the Marines showed up. I know because I was on the phone with sheriffs and I was on the phone with local law enforcement who said, no, we don't need anybody. The situation is under control. This resolution distorts the facts of what happened in Los Angeles. It falsely paints a picture of widespread chaos across Los Angeles to justify and legitimize Donald Trump's dangerous decision to deploy the National Guard and U.S. Marines on American soil, all without the consent of California's governor or a request from local law leaders and law enforcement. That's why I worked with Representative Zoe Lofgren to introduce a resolution that condemns violence, that supports peaceful protests, and sets the facts straight. Angelenos have exercised their First Amendment right to peacefully protest federal ICE raids that have terrorized our communities. Unfortunately, there have been a small handful of troublemakers who have taken to the streets to cause destruction and physical confrontation. They should be arrested and prosecuted, something that the governor, the mayor, and LA's congressional delegation have called for from the start. Let's remember, though, how we got here. What we've seen on our streets is chilling. Masked men in unmarked cars, no identification or badge, drawing weapons, swarming businesses and parks to indiscriminately stop, arrest, and detain immigrants and U.S. citizens. People are being stopped and detained because of the color of their skin. These are not violent criminals. The majority of the people have no criminal record. They're taking the parents and they're leaving the kids stranded. They have bang grenades in crowds and sending those off. ICE is even arresting U.S. citizens based on how they look.
I would grant the gentlelady additional 30 seconds.
The gentlelady has an additional 30 seconds.
It is this conduct that's causing people to go out on the street and peacefully protest. President Trump's deployment of troops only escalated tensions and further unrest. Democrats have been clear. Anyone who committed violence must be held accountable. We must recognize that peaceful protests are patriotic. Deploying troops to silence dissent is not. This resolution ignores those facts to score political points. I urge a no vote, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields.
We reserve.
The gentleman from Maryland reserves. The gentleman from California is recognized.
The assertion has been made repeatedly that the president's deployment of the Guard escalated tensions. We have seen zero evidence for that, and we all saw the images, the horrifying violence that was occurring before the Guard came in. I would also remind my colleagues who continue to assert that there was something untoward about the president deploying the Guard that the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals has ruled otherwise. In a unanimous decision, the court analyzed the relevant statute, which provides that the president has the authority to make use of the Guard in order to stop the execution of federal law from being disrupted. And the judges looked at the facts on the ground and said, when you have Molotov cocktails being thrown at officers, when you have a commercial dumpster being used as a battering ram in order to break into a federal office building's parking lot, when you have roadways being shut down, this looks a lot like there's a disruption of the ability to carry out the federal law. So again, not me saying this. This is a unanimous panel of Trump-appointed and Biden-appointed judges who came to that determination. And I'll happily answer the question of my friend from Maryland about what is the question when it comes to agriculture. Well, here's what the law says. The law says that coming into this country without authorization is illegal, categorically. And then it is within the discretion of the executive branch how to prioritize deportations. And across party lines, there has always been a strong focus on prioritizing those with criminal records. Beyond that, different presidents have chosen to exercise that discretion in different ways. For example, President Obama chose to deport millions of people during his time in office. And it's ultimately a matter of how the president chooses to carry out that policy. But here's the important point for purposes of today's debate. Whatever your views are on that matter, whether you favor deporting everyone in the country illegally, whether you favor deporting no one in the country illegally, you should not, you cannot, you absolutely must not use violence in order to advance that point of view. That is the principle at stake in today's debate, and to vote against this resolution is to countenance what happened, the horrifying events that we saw in my state. I reserve.
The gentleman from California reserves. The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm glad we're getting somewhere in this debate. The gentleman concedes that it's within the discretion of the administration to decide where to target resources. I was just trying to find out where the administration is this week, because we're getting conflicting accounts of whether or not they're still targeting the farm workers, because we're getting reports from California, Texas, New Mexico, that entire farms are shut down because there have been ICE raids. The other workers are afraid to come to work, and they're begging the president to do something. He said we would stop doing that. Then they reversed it, I think, when Stephen Miller got involved, and now the agriculture interests again are getting involved. They should get the policy together. But it speaks to an underlying problem here, which is that the overwhelming number of arrests now are not of people who are criminal suspects for anything. 65% of the people who've been taken by ICE since this administration began had no criminal convictions at all. And that's why you read articles like in the Wall Street Journal about small rural towns that voted for Donald Trump that are up in arms, that are in an uproar because people who have done nothing wrong and are pillars of the community are being taken away from their workplaces, their farms, their restaurants, their businesses, in their homes. I'd also would like to ask the distinguished gentleman from California, whom I know to be a serious student of the law because he was a student of mine of the law when we were at Yale Law School together. What authorizes the government to send people out who are not identified with any law enforcement insignia, masked in unmarked cars, to arrest people? Doesn't that set the people up for danger in America? That's what the assassins in Minnesota were doing. They showed up dressed like some kind of vague, like police person without any law enforcement insignia in an unmarked car. That sets us up for danger. Don't you think that the law enforcement norm is for people to know who police officers are so that they know they have to submit to their authority? I would happily yield or I'll reserve and see whether my colleague would like to answer the question.
The gentleman from Maryland reserves. The gentleman from California is recognized.
Well, if it's true that law enforcement is somehow never allowed to be in something other than their uniform, I think you have a lot of people who got tickets for running a stop sign when there was an unmarked car there who would be happy to hear that because they have now a new basis to challenge that. I think we are all aware that there are circumstances like when someone is undercover, when they're doing a stakeout, in which it doesn't make sense to identify yourself as an officer. Now, of course, that's neither here nor there because we've seen that in these very targeted operations, these folks are very clearly identified. And to the extent that some have chosen to not have their faces revealed, it's because we have seen the threats against ICE absolutely skyrocket over the last several months. And it's, again, quite ironic when you had folks on that side of the aisle who were all about masks in the most absurd of settings during the COVID years. We'd have people playing singles tennis or out on the ocean paddleboarding, and they're required to wear a mask. You'd have 2-year-olds having to wear masks all day when no other countries, did this. And yet now, when a federal officer undertaking dangerous activity, trying to do their jobs, yet facing threats, being doxxed, feeling like they and their family are at risk, chooses to take this protective measure, now you have a problem with it? I reserve.
The gentleman from California reserves. The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Well, we have no further speakers. We're ready to close.
Does the gentleman wish to? So the gentleman reserves at this time?
Yeah, I reserve at this time.
The gentleman from California is recognized.
I have no further speakers and wish to close. I reserve.
The gentleman also reserves. So the gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Masked agents in unmarked cars sent out violating people's due process rights, as the courts have found, including all the way up to the Supreme Court. They're arresting members of Congress. They're prosecuting members of Congress for doing their jobs. They federalized the state National Guard when the police in Los Angeles and the elected officials are doing their jobs. This is an authoritarian attack on constitutional democracy. We must get back to the rule of law, and if nothing else, the Republicans should put up the plaque they are committed to put up, honoring the police officers who defended American democracy, the Vice President of the United States, the House of Representatives, the Senate, and everybody in this room during the January 6th violent insurrection, which Donald Trump was impeached for having incited. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from California is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, what happened in LA put on stark display years of reckless and failed policies, starting with the millions of people who came across the border illegally during the Biden years, and then the sanctuary policies that California has enacted, not to mention the countless people who have been released from prison early thanks to reckless crime policies. But today's resolution is not about any of that. Today's resolution is about something much simpler, a notion that I would hope would be unobjectionable, that in this country, we settle our differences through reasoned arguments and debate, not through force and violence. That we make political decisions through elections and not through riots. I hope that this resolution will receive strong bipartisan support on the floor today, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. All time for debate has expired pursuant to House Resolution 530. The previous question is ordered on the resolution and the preamble. The question is on the adoption of the resolution. Those in favor say aye. Those in favor opposed say no. The ayes have it. The resolution is agreed to.
I'd like to call for the ayes.
The gentleman requesting the yeas and nays?
Yes.
The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 15-minute vote. On this vote, the yeas are 215, the nays are 195. The resolution is adopted. Without objection, the motion reconsidered is laid on the table. Somebody else? Are they going to do 1 minute? Okay. I'll hang. So do we? The chair lays before the House a communication.
The Speaker's Rooms, Washington, D.C., June 27, 2025. I hereby designate the period from Friday, June 27, 2025, through Sunday, July 6, 2025, as a district work period under Clause 13 of Rule 1. Signed sincerely, Mike Johnson, Speaker of the House of Representatives.
Okay, waiting on her.
Entertain request for 1-minute speeches.
The House will be in order. The chair will now entertain requests for 1-minute speeches. For what purpose does the gentleman from Ohio seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to recognize the Hillsborough High School Lady Indians softball team. The Lady Indians had a historic season this year that saw them achieve over 20 wins and secure the Division IV Regional Championship for the first time in 23 years, finishing the year as state runner-ups. Teamwork propelled them to great achievements as the Lady Indians consistently had great performances on the mound and in the batter's box. Along the way, the Lady Indians were supported by a dedicated fan base of parents and alumni that fueled their desire for victory. Without the fan support and the support of their coaches, none of this would have been possible. I'll always be grateful for the parents and coaches that pour so much of themselves into our student athletes. The great achievements of the Lady Indians belong to them as much as they belong to the players. To the Lady Indians, all of Southern Ohio is proud of your accomplishments, and I look forward to another great season next year. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back.
Thank you. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Oregon seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I seek unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of the LGBTQ community to celebrate Pride Month and to call out President Trump's reckless decision to shut down the 988 Specialized LGBTQ Youth Hotline. This is a devastating decision that will affect people in every corner of our country. I want to put this into perspective. In 2024, 12% of LGBTQ youth attempted suicide, while nearly 40% seriously considered it. In comparison, the national average for students contemplating suicide is 20%, still far too large. Additionally, many of these young people are left without critical support from caring adults, leaving them nowhere to turn when crisis falls. We cannot deny the fact that this hotline is a vital service. Mental health is not a partisan issue, and our children should not be used as pawns in the president's purely political game. As the co-chair of the Bipartisan Mental Health Caucus, I am committed to expanding access to specialty mental health care by training qualified professionals to provide culturally relevant care and ensuring that high-quality, affordable services are available to all who need them. I will not remain silent in the face of President Trump's targeted attacks, and I will continue to fight for the LGBTQ communities. Thank you, and I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia seek recognition?
Ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute, to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to recognize one of our nation's greatest World War II museums, the National Museum of the Mighty 8th Air Force. The museum, located just outside of Savannah in Pooler, Georgia, received a preserved B-24 Liberator from the National Museum of the U.S. Air Force in Barksdale Air Force Base. The aircraft is one of the 3 remaining B-24's relics from World War II, originally named Rupert the Roo II. Rupert will undergo a brief restoration process and will join a B-17 Flying Fortress to become the newest centerpiece of the museum. These 2 machines represent the complete collection of the aircraft flown by the Mighty Eighth throughout the Second World War in both the European and Pacific theaters. Thank you to the Barksdale Air Force Base for reallocation and preservation of this historic planes. Efforts like these allow the National Museum of the Mighty Eighth Air Force to fully educate the public on the nation's most storied Air Force division ever known. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask for unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we often speak about how Congress can help small businesses grow, but the true hard work is being done on main streets across this nation. In the Sound Shore region of Westchester, business owners are advancing their own businesses and finding time to lead local chambers of commerce, implementing programs and events that promote their business districts. From Mistletoe Magic and Rye to the Downtown Farmers Market in Scarsdale, sidewalk sales in Larchmont and Mamaroneck, these entrepreneurs are driving revenue and profits with creativity and energy. Let me recognize the work of these local leaders: Catherine White, New Rochelle; Michael Murphy, Mamaroneck; Brian Jackson, Rye; Ralph Carcutt in Harrison; Cammie Morrissey and Fritz Falanke at Portchester, Rybrook, Rytown; Gina Proya and Nancy White, Larchmont; Marcy Berman Goldstein and Ken Gidden, Scarsdale Business Alliance; Ann Gold and Mark Jerome, New Rochelle Business Improvement District. In future speeches, I will recognize leaders in the Bronx and along the Hudson River communities of Westchester. We salute them all. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Wisconsin seek recognition?
Thank you. I'd like to speak for a minute and have the ability to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
There are good days and bad days in this building. Today we have a little bit of a happy day and sad day in the Grothman office. John Nagel, part of my policy shop, is leaving today. He's a great guy. He's the pride of Poway, California. Well, it's our loss. It's going to be the gain of the Pacific Legal Foundation. But I'd like to say one more time, thanks for all the help you've given me, John, and come back to our office again and again when you're on the Hill.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Maryland seek recognition?
Speaker, I seek unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, 7 years ago, on June 28, 2018, a gunman who should have never been able to purchase a firearm walked into the Capital Gazette and killed 5 members of our hometown newspaper: Gerald Fishman, Rob Hyacin, John McNamara, Rebecca Smith, Wendy Winters. Amid the shock and horror, just hours after the shooting, the Capitol issued a simple statement: "We're putting out a damn paper tomorrow." And that they did. These journalists made clear that the Fourth Estate cannot be silenced, and they made Maryland damn proud. On this tragic anniversary, I want to make it clear on this House floor that as elected officials, we were not sent here to look away, to give up, or to offer our thoughts and prayers alone. That is why I rise today, to remember the journalists we lost, to continue the fight for full freedom of the press, and for common sense gun safety legislation that protects all of our communities. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from South Carolina seek recognition?
Reverend Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute, revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Reverend Speaker. House Republicans have passed legislation that delivers on promises made, promises kept to President Donald Trump by stopping wasteful spending with a big, beautiful bill, eliminating taxes on tips and overtime. This bill secures the border, unleashes American energy, delivers the largest tax cut for working and middle-class families ever, creates jobs, and brings common sense to government. Medicare and Social Security will be protected, while Medicaid will be guarded against waste, fraud, and abuse, as pioneered by Senator Billy Garrett of South Carolina, ensuring it is available to our most vulnerable Americans with laws enforced by Solicitor David Stumbo. It is important to everyone. A family with 2 children in South Carolina will receive higher take-home pay between $7,000 to $10,000 with the new beautiful bill. In conclusion, God bless our troops as the global war on terrorism continues. Trump is reinstituting existing laws to protect American families with peace through strength, revealing war criminal Putin lies, insulting Trump, mocking Trump, with Trump allied with the murderous regime in Iran who proclaim death to America. I yield back.
For what purpose does a gentlewoman from Maryland seek recognition?
Ask for unanimous consent to address the House and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, as chair of the New Dems Rural Broadband Task Force, I rise today to highlight the incredible progress we're making, and yet the critical work that remains to close the digital divide in our country. And this is a personal passion of mine, as I spent years as a nonprofit advocate and then had a tenure at NTIA to roll out the broadband BEAD programming. This past Monday, I had the honor of hosting my colleague, Rep. Budzinski, in Frederick, Maryland, in the 4th step on the New Dems on the Road tour. We visited a fiber installation and sat down with local leaders, government officials, and industry experts to talk about what's working and what remains in the way of delivering high-speed, affordable internet. We also discussed the challenges facing broadband deployment, including new rulemaking efforts, potential disruptions of BEAD implementation, federal funding freezes, and the incredible risk posed by the AI moratorium linked to the BEAD funding in the budget package. I've just seen how transformative broadband access can be, from telehealth to learning, to also our U.S. competitiveness and emergency public communications. Just as rural electrification lit up America in the 20th, broadband is the key to unlocking opportunity in the 21st. Let's finish the job. Thank you, and I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Illinois seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to honor the life and legacy of Sister Rosemary Conley of Chicago, Illinois, who passed away on June 19th at the age of 94. During her extraordinary life, Sister Rosemary served with unmatched devotion as the longtime executive director of Misericordia, a home for children and adults with developmental disabilities on Chicago's North Side. She started her work in 1969 when Misericordia was a small and under-resourced institution caring for about 50 children with profound challenges. Sister Rosemary brought a bold vision rooted in compassion and dignity. And over the next 5 decades, she transformed Misericordia into one of the nation's most respected care facilities, serving hundreds of residents and employing over 1,200 staff and volunteers. She spearheaded fundraising, created jobs through social enterprises like the Hearts and Flower Bakery, and expanded the campus to include community-integrated homes, revered across Northern Illinois and beyond. Sister Rosemary was widely recognized for her impact on families and her unshakable belief that every life has purpose. I want to extend my condolences to all of Sister Rosemary's family, friends, and colleagues on this immense loss, and I yield back.
For what purpose does a gentlewoman from Vermont seek recognition? Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, we all know that the Republicans' so-called big, beautiful bill is wildly unpopular. Every poll, including Fox News, shows that Americans think it's rotten, and it is. That's why Trump is trying desperately to rehabilitate the bill in the eyes of the public. But Americans aren't stupid. They don't want their health care taken away. They don't want us taking food away from hungry people. They don't want our rural hospitals to close. They don't want to add trillions of dollars to the debt, and they sure as hell do not want the wealthy to continue to get rich off the back of the rest of us. This is not rocket science. They want a tax code that doesn't screw us over. They want affordable rent and mortgages. They want lower health care costs. They want to see us fighting for a better future for their families. All this bill does is take and take and take away from working people and provide it once again to the billionaires who do not need it. They see right through it, and so do we. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Arkansas seek recognition?
Ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute, revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today I want to celebrate the storied career of Officer John Saub, who will be retiring today after proudly serving the Capitol Police for over 30 years. Officer Saub first joined the Capitol Police in 1993 when he was hired as a security aide before being hired as a full-time officer the following year. Working in Capitol Divisions 2 and 3, Officer Saub has protected this Capitol and its millions of visitors and workers with honor. After 30 years, he likely has enough stories to fill this House chamber, and a number of those include his brother, William, as the two served together from 1994 until 2008. In 2011, John made his way down to the House Intelligence Committee, where he spent every day for the last 14 years securing our members and staff. For over a decade, John has been a valuable asset to our intelligence team, not only providing security, but also serving as the committee expert on all things capitals and commanders. While everyone at Intel will miss our friend, we wish him the best as he embarks on his next great journey. Enjoy your retirement, John.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and change my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
I rise today to honor Stephen Chaos Camus, a vibrant soul from Blythe, California, whose life reminds us of the urgent need for compassion in mental health care. Stephen was a talented hairdresser with a bright personality and deep love for his mother, Angela Colangeli. He faced incredible challenges, addiction, stigma around his queer identity, and schizophrenia, yet he fought to find peace, often without the professional help he needed. On October 27, 2021, Stephen tragically took his own life. But even in his darkest moments, he dreamed of helping others not to feel alone in their struggles. In his memory, his mother and his father, George, founded Peace from Chaos, a nonprofit supporting those living with mental illness, addiction, and social rejection. As Men's Mental Health Awareness Month comes to an end, let's honor Stephen by fighting for a world where no one suffers in silence and everyone has access to care, support, and dignity. Thank you, and I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I request unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Over the weekend, the world once again experienced a shocking act of terrorism committed against innocent civilians in Syria. Those who attended Sunday Mass at the Mar Elias Church were not combatants. They were members of the community who sought to live in peace and rebuild from war. They were members of our community who had endured unimaginable suffering and faced an uncertain future with faith and hope. In the shadow of relentless terror and violence, it takes enormous courage to do many of the things that we take for granted. We can take inspiration from those who faced down the cowardly perpetrators of destruction with faith and hope as they work to rebuild their nation. I joined the Greater Lehigh Valley's Syrian community in praying for the victims of this attack and for peace to return to Syria. May God bless all of those who stand up in the face of terror and violence. I yield back.
For what purpose does a gentlewoman from Ohio seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I request unanimous consent to address the House and to extend and revise my remarks.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today, I rise to recognize 3 outstanding police officers from the Fairlawn Police Department as this week's Ohio's 13th Congressional District Champions of the Week. Last month, officers Francisco Corona, Brian Buskirk, and Hannah Plant exemplified the best of public service when they jumped into action to save a life of a woman in distress. On May 23, 2025, Officer Buskirk noticed a car stop on a sidewalk where he found a woman unconscious and unresponsive. With the assistance of Officers Corona and Plant, the officers broke the car window and extracted the woman, then quickly initiated CPR while preparing the automated external defibrillator. Their teamwork and rapid response made the difference in a critical life or death situation. I want to extend my sincere gratitude to Officers Corona, Buskirk, and Plant, and the Fairlawn Police and Fire Departments for continuing to keep our community safe. Your actions and bravery do not go unnoticed. And on behalf of Ohio's 13th Congressional District and the United States House of Representatives, we thank you for your service to our community. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Utah seek recognition?
I ask the unanimous consent to address the House and revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It was a pleasure to visit the Midvale Boys and Girls Club recently and speak with the youth about success, grit, and the power of big dreams. This summer, over 200 young people, supported by 17 dedicated staff members, were granted an environment in which they can have fun. In the process, they'll build character, learn leadership skills, and develop healthy relationships. Many of the youth will take part in activities like the Run Club, where the benefits of competition can be experienced. They're also learning the importance of goal setting, the pain of preparation, and the tenacity to push through the pain. Then the process of learning one of the more important life lessons, and that is we cannot control the scoreboard, but we can control the hustle. These tenets are at the heart of meritocracy and what I observed during my visit of the Midvale Boys and Girls Club. To the staff, thank you for your commitment, and to the young people, enjoy the experience, remember what you're learning, apply what you've learned, and more importantly, pass it on. I yield back. Thank you.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Ohio seek recognition?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to honor the life and legacy of a remarkable daughter of Northwest Ohio, Diane D. Haywood Talmadge. While her passing leaves a deep chasm in our community, Dee was a formidable force for good. She was a Republican, and I'm a Democrat. And her patriotism, her philanthropy, her good sense, and elegance bestowed a living legacy that serves as an example of an exemplary life well lived. Dee embodied the very highest aspirations for Northwest Ohio, a product of Toledo's DeVilbiss High School, a proud Ohio State Buckeye, and a Toledo Rocket. She used her education to give back to the community that raised her. Dee served on the Ottawa Hills School Board, the boards of Owens Community College and Woodlawn Cemetery, and helped guide the University of Toledo's Alumni Association. She always led with vision, clarity, courage, and compassion, and her inspired leadership drew from all walks of life to make a difference. She mentored generations of new leaders, many of whom sit on boards, serve in office, or volunteer today because of her example. To observe Dee barreling down the street in her convertible, broadly smiling and waving, was to feel the heart of Toledo itself. Her love for our people, progress, and potential was boundless, and her life was not just one of service, but of joyful commitment to her family, and I will put their names in the record, including her beloved husband of 63 years, Brigadier General Dr. Lance Talmadge, a dedicated community and military leader alongside her. May her legacy of character and commitment continue to inspire generations to come. She surely will be missed. She was one of a kind. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Tennessee seek recognition?
I seek unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, today I rise in support of this morning's ruling from the Supreme Court that will greatly reform the ability of rogue district court judges to issue nationwide injunctions. According to a Politico article this morning, with this ruling, the Supreme Court, quote, said that in most cases, judges can only grant relief to the parties who brought a particular lawsuit and may not extend those decisions to protect other individuals without going through the process of converting a suit into a class action. I have been fighting for this day for years, including introducing legislation in multiple sessions of Congress that would curtail the ability of rogue district court judges to issue nationwide injunctions, often at the behest of special interest groups that shop around for a friendly district court judge. This is a good day for democracy. Please join me in congratulating the Supreme Court for this outstanding ruling. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from California seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I request unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend my remarks, sir.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As Black Music Month comes to a close, I rise in the House today for 1 minute to honor my dear friend, Dwayne Wiggins. Dwayne Wiggins passed away on March the 7th, 2025, and my community at Oakland, California, and the world continues to grieve. We are mourning not only his significant contributions to the Black music community, but we knew Dwayne as a legendary musician who gave as much as his voice as he gave to community. He made and produced music that uplifted so many, but moreover, we know him as a monumentous soul of good. He mentored countless artists and young people, including Destiny's Child and Beyonce, helped to start the career of Alicia Keys, again was on the Grammy stage every year for decades. He opened up many spaces for young people in my community in California's District 12 to thrive. He was incredibly generous. But moreover, we know that there is no dying when it comes to Dwayne's voice. You cannot kill culture. And we love you, and we love your family, and we're so thankful for what you have given our community. Your voice will never cease. And I yield back. Thank you.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Michigan seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I want to address the House, unanimous consent to address the House and revise my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to honor immigrants. Throughout American history, immigrants of all kinds have made our country great. Sergey Brin invented Google, and Madeleine Albright blazed trails as the first female Secretary of State. But instead of celebrating this diversity, many Republicans want to shame immigrants. On Tuesday, Zohran Mamdani, an immigrant from Uganda, won the New York mayoral primary. Representative Andy Ogles promptly went on an unhinged anti-immigrant racist rant throughout yesterday and today, calling this freely elected man and U.S. citizen Little Muhammad, called for revoking his citizenship and for him to be deported with no just cause. We must always condemn hate. I have introduced a censure resolution, House Resolution 553, against Andy Ogles for his horrific anti-immigrant sentiment. Immigrants make our country great. And I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to honor the amazing life of Sally Ruth Moore, a trailblazer in education, a fierce advocate for equity, and a beloved daughter of Grand Prairie and a pillar of the community in Dalworth on San Antonio Street. Ms. Moore passed away this year at 91, and she leaves behind a major legacy of education in the North Texas community. For over 4 decades, she devoted her life to uplifting students and breaking barriers, becoming the associate superintendent in the Grand Prairie ISD. Her journey began as a teacher, a counselor, a principal, where she received numerous accolades for her excellence in the classroom and shaping and forming students for generations. Her leadership wasn't just about academics, it was about dignity, discipline, and love. She was just an amazing person. A school was named after her, Sally Moore Elementary, in the Dalworth community in Grand Prairie in 2001, but her legacy will live on for a very long time. She leaves behind a son, Greg, and if she looks familiar to you, it is because she is the last remaining sibling out of the 4 Johnson kids. That is Eddie Bernice Johnson, our former colleague. That is her sister. And so we remember her today as a servant leader and a giant in Texas education and a beacon of hope. And may her memory be a blessing. And may we all strive to follow her excellence. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 3rd, 2025, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Green, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Minority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, and still I rise. I say, and still I rise, because I have been censured, but I'd like to assure people that I have not been silenced. Censured, but not silenced. And I rise today, Mr. Speaker, proud to say that I am an ally of the LGBTQIA+ community, an ally. And I rise as an ally, Mr. Speaker, to acknowledge that HRES 550, the original LGBTQIA Pride Month resolution of 1925, is a part of the history of the records of the House of Representatives. This resolution is a resolution that I'm honored to present annually, and it speaks to the accomplishments of the community, but it also addresses many of the things that are shortcomings in our society as they impact the community. So I'm proud today to rise and say that as an ally of the community, this resolution has 125 co-sponsors. For many, that might not seem like a lot, but I can recall a time when we had many persons who wanted to sign on, but for reasons that were associated with elections and politics, they would not sign on. I think people are overcoming those concerns and those fears, and they're recognizing the fact that we ought not discriminate against people because of who they are. I believe that it would be beneficial for people to talk to people who are from the community before drawing conclusions. I especially say this as it relates to the trans community. There are many issues to be discussed about the trans community, but today I just want to acknowledge that having talked to people from the trans community, having had an opportunity to have dialogue where I can ask questions and get answers from the people themselves, I have come to a conclusion that this community exists because people literally want to be themselves. I spoke to a trans person who informed me that this person, without giving any hint as to whom it is, because the person has spoken to me in confidence, but this person indicated that since the person could recognize the image in a mirror, the person realized that there was a need to have a different image because the person wanted to be of a different sex than the person was assigned at birth. I have talked to more than one person who has given me similar evidence. I think we ought to believe people when they say this. I just don't think that people will go out of their way to try to convince you that this is appropriate and would do some of the things necessary to identify themselves properly just to get attention. Nobody wants to get attention by having surgery that costs thousands of dollars. Nobody wants to get attention by having to face a society that rejects too often people because they don't understand who they are and what they're all about. We're talking about people who just want to live their lives and be left alone. They're not trying to impose themselves upon other people. These are decent human beings who just want to be left alone and be allowed to be themselves. I cannot for the life of me understand how someone could see this as harmful to society in the main. I have myself been discriminated against. Having been born a son of the segregated South, having been born an African American, I have been discriminated against. I can remember when I had to go to the back door to get food simply because of how I looked. Had nothing to do with any behavior that I exhibited. Just because of the color of my skin, I had to go to back doors. I had to drink from a filthy colored water fountain with a pristine white water fountain next to it, simply because of the color of my skin and how I looked. I had to sit in the balcony of the movie and the back of the bus simply because of how I looked. And I am so grateful to God for having me have those experiences, because it gives me some sense of appreciation for what others go through simply because of who they say they are. We cannot have the great country that we claim we are if we will continue to discriminate against people because of who they say they are. This is the United States of America. Liberty and justice for all. That has to include the trans community. It really does have to include it to the extent that they can walk the streets and not be in fear. There are still people who will harm members of the trans community if they can catch them at a certain place at a certain time when nobody's looking, just because of who they are. We talk about other people living in fear, and I think we should, because there are others living in fear as well. But little attention is given to this community and the fear that it has to live and coexist with simply because of who they say they are. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm proud to have this resolution presented today. I plan to continue to introduce the Pride Resolution. I've been doing so for some time now. I had the honor of serving with the Honorable Barney Frank when I was in Congress. The Honorable Barney Frank, as a member of Congress from 1981 to 2013, is recognized in this resolution as an honorary co-sponsor of the resolution. This resolution tracks the history of persons having the opportunity to first embrace themselves with the protestation that started and to move on to the point where now persons can actually embrace marriage and live with the person and love with the person that they choose. As an ally of this community, I find none of this offensive. I find all of this to be natural for human beings who want to just simply be themselves. I am also honored to tell you that in Houston, Texas, not only will this resolution be celebrated, but also there is a pride parade that will rival any parade in this country. People show up in the thousands, the tens of thousands, possibly hundreds of thousands. And they align the streets and they celebrate and some, to a certain extent, commemorate lives that have been lost because they are simply a part of this community. But this is something that I would hope we could see around the country to a greater extent than we see it. Houston, Texas has embraced it. Many other places have. But until it's embraced in the small towns, in the boroughs, in places where people are now at some point, in some places, afraid to announce who they are, until this attitude of pride is embraced by the workplace, workplaces where people cannot indicate who they are, because if they do, they're likely to lose their jobs. Until that same level of pride, that same spirit of embracing people as who they are, judging them by the content of their character, not what they believe them to be within. I think we ought to believe people when they tell you who they are. So today, my prayer is that this pride resolution will inspire people to do more than simply say hello, but will become an ally. I'm recruiting. The pride community needs allies, needs people who are willing to stand up publicly and say, I am an ally of the community. And when you do this, I assure you, you will be doing what is expected of people of goodwill who want to see people simply live their lives, enjoy who they are, just simply be themselves. You will promote and you will help to cause a good many people that you may never meet and greet to benefit from another person becoming an ally of the LGBTQIA plus community. I'll close with this. The LGBTQIA community does not exist in a vacuum. It exists in a country that prides itself in pledging liberty and justice for all. This is an opportunity for every person who's never had the opportunity to talk to a person from this community to just do so. And I guarantee you, if you do so, you'll leave with a different attitude. I absolutely believe this. And I also say to you, don't worry about the pride community trying to impose anything on you. If you don't know a person from the community, you are not likely to be invited to a wedding. So you don't have to worry about some imposition. Just worry about making America all that it claims it is. I plan to do it, and I invite others to do so as well. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 3, 2025, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Roy, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Majority Leader.
I thank the Speaker. Appreciate my friend from Texas. Wish him safe travels back home to our great state. I will yield to the gentleman.
Hey, I want to let people know this, not just with the Honorable Chip Roy, but I have relationships with people across all lines in this Congress. And when he comes to the floor and says he wishes me safe travels, I want to let people know that I would extend that to him, but also that notwithstanding what others may think, I have great respect for you. I don't have to agree with you to have great respect for you, and you don't have to agree with me. But at some point, we have to do what we're doing now and let people know that we have respect for each other, notwithstanding these differences. And I really appreciate the way you have called for regular order. That means something to me. So while I have not been on the floor with you when you've done it, I want you to know that I've noticed that you've done it, and I appreciate you, and I consider you a friend. And I yield back.
I appreciate those kind remarks from the gentleman. I consider the gentleman from Texas a friend. I'm sincere in wishing him safe travels and well wishes heading back home. You know, we throw a lot of barbs around this chamber and for good reason. I mean, we're here. You know, everybody always says how crazy it is and how divided we are. And I always remind people that, you know, when was the last time you had a Secretary of Treasury and Vice President dueling in the street, right? I mean, that has happened in our past, and it's not now. That was 200 and change years ago. So we have differences of opinion, and that's the reason this body exists. We represent our constituents, and we're supposed to express on their behalf our views and consistent with the Constitution in our Republican form of government. So I'm here today to do that. I'm here to talk about what has been known now as the One Big Beautiful Bill, which is in simple speak a reconciliation package, which is supposed to be designed to reconcile current policies, tax and spending, to achieve a reduction in deficits, or make sure that we're not adding to the deficit. So here we are. And the House of Representatives worked together and passed a bill. We passed a budget, we then passed the new budget, and then we passed a bill. We sent it to the Senate. The House bill was not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, from my perspective. The House bill didn't do enough on many things that I think are important. But the House bill had core components of tax cut extensions for hardworking Americans. The House bill had core components to give resources to the President, the administration, Tom Homan, Stephen Miller, Secretary Noem, to secure the border and, importantly, to remove people through ICE and enforcement. The House bill had core components to make sure our defense can modernize. The House bill had core components, and this is where it gets important, to terminate the Green New Scam subsidies. Not all of them. That's why I said the bill wasn't perfect. I think we should repeal them all. Save over $1 trillion. Stop subsidizing China. Stop subsidizing big corporations. Stop subsidizing unreliable energy. Stop interfering with the market. We only terminated about 60% of the Green New Scam. I think we should have done better. The House had core components in it to reform Medicaid. My colleagues on the other side of the aisle are saying we're going to be taking Medicaid away from people. Medicaid goes up between 20 and 30% under our budget over the next 10 years. Medicaid under our bill would be focused primarily on the vulnerable population more than the able-bodied. I think the bill should have gone farther. I think we should have reformed more of the money laundering scam, that the FMAP, 7 times multiple, giving more money to the able-bodied than the vulnerable. To stop the scam that blue states are taking money from red states and non-expansion states and giving it to hospitals and insurance companies. I think we should have ended that, done more. But we took a giant step forward to have work requirements, to ensure that Medicaid could actually be solvent. It's gone up another $1 trillion just under the Biden administration in terms of its overall baseline cost. Now, that's all in the weeds. People watching this home, they don't know what's going on. They're going about their lives. All they know is that there's a big bill, there's some tax stuff in it, there's some spending stuff in it, some border stuff, and that's about all they know. So why am I here? Because the House passed that bill, imperfect, but I will call passable by definition. We sent it to the Senate. The Senate is making the bill worse as we speak. The Senate is making decisions, both policy decisions and what's called going through a process over there to see if it's language that's supposed to be in a budget-related reconciliation package. We call it a bird process. They're pulling pieces out of it. The bill is getting worse. Now, let me see if I can put it in basic terms. This chart's not going to mean much to most people back home. You don't even need to look at all the bars. It gets kind of complex. But I just want it to be real simple. This orange line on this chart, and people in the gallery, you can't see it, but imagine an orange line on a XY graph. That orange line says that under the House bill, on a dynamic basis, what does that mean? That accounting for economic growth, accounting for the tax policies, accounting for what we believe will happen, we would have about additional $72 billion of deficit spending over 10 years. Sadly, $72 billion is kind of a rounding error when you're talking about 10 years. In other words, it's close to break even. We would cut taxes, we would reduce spending, we would get economic growth, and we believe we would add nothing more to the deficit. Now, here's the problem. Adding nothing more to the deficit means we still have deficits. We still have $1.8 trillion to $2 trillion a year in deficits. So I voted for a bill that will perpetuate $1.8 trillion deficits. And I hated doing it. But I did it because in this process, in this political environment, to get the reforms that we were getting to Medicaid, to get the reforms that we were getting to terminate 60% of the Green New Scam subsidies undermining our grid, to get the tax cut extensions for hardworking Americans. To me, it was worth doing that when I thought credibly, believably, we would not be adding to the deficit and get those important reforms. But here we are. The Senate, in its infinite wisdom over in the House of Lords, they are embarking on focusing on what we would have anticipated they would focus on, which is just the tax cut side for the most part. They're backing away from the spending cuts, the spending restraint. They're backing away from the reforms that we think makes the math work. And therein lies the problem. You want to know why we're $37 trillion in debt as a nation? It's because too often my Republican colleagues have never met a tax cut they didn't want to advance, while then campaigning on balancing the budget and cutting spending that they never want to vote for. We can't do that. We have to actually lead. In a Republican form of government, there are 435 of us, representing 30-something million Americans. I represent about 750,000 people. In a Republican form of government, I'm supposed to take the hard votes. I'm supposed to go back to my constituents and say, well, we're doing this and this and this. We think it's good. I know you wanted this, but we can't have that because we're $37 trillion in debt. I go back to this chart. There's a big yellow bar over here with flames on top. It shows almost $1 trillion of additional deficit that the Senate bill would add if the policies they are currently debating in the Senate are adhered to, meaning they got rid of a lot of our savings and they made certain tax cuts more permanent. They extended them. I support making those tax cuts permanent and extending them, but not without the spending reductions necessary to get us back to deficit neutrality or deficit savings. Why does this matter? Because Republicans will go around all the time and say, don't worry, all tax cuts pay for themselves. Let me be very clear. Not all tax cuts pay for themselves. They just don't. I grew up a child of the 80s. I grew up looking on studying supply side economics. I believe in leaving money in the hands of the American people to produce wealth. I believe that does create more revenue the Treasury can bring in with lower rates on a bigger pie. I think that's important. But you still have to do basic math. If you reduce the rate, which I want to do, be perfectly clear, for the worker, for the family, for the business, you're going to get a revenue reduction to the Treasury. Your hope is the economic growth will offset part of that. When we do the math and we talk to every outside group and we listen to the CBO, Congressional Budget Office gets a lot wrong, but every outside group who looks at this tells us that our assumptions that we baked in of $2.5 trillion of economic growth is a kind of reasonable sweet spot, meaning we're assuming the growth. We're already baking in that you're going to get more revenue. But when you keep extending these tax cuts and you don't do enough spending cuts and you weaken the spending cuts that we put in place, you end up with this chart, $1 trillion of additional deficit on top of the roughly 18 trillion we're not even touching. My question for my colleagues, My voice is a little rough. My question for my colleagues, was even the House bill good enough? Not really. It really wasn't. I held my nose and voted for it. I want to help the president. I want to move the agenda forward. I want tax cuts. I want the Green New Scam subsidies terminated. I want Medicaid reformed. But we were leaving in place, adding another $18 trillion to $20 trillion of deficit spending, if we're lucky for it to be that low, over the next 10 years. But if the Senate is going to send a bill back to us that's going to add $1 trillion more and not reform Medicaid properly and not terminate the Green New Scam that the president campaigned on terminating, then there is no way I can vote for that bill when it comes back. And that needs to be said, and it needs to be clear. The fact of the matter is, our country is hanging on by a very thin fiscal thread. Bond markets are recognizing this. There was a headline in the Financial Times today. Foreign markets are starting to pull out of federal treasuries. Interest rates are doing what they're doing. You can change the Fed chairman all you want, but if you don't fix the fiscal mess we're in, the outer part of that curve, which is what sets our mortgage rates, our long-term borrowing rates, that's still going to be a mess, and the American people aren't going to be able to afford homes. The average age of the American homeowner today is as high as it's ever been. It's up about 10 years. Now you're in your upper 30s before you're buying home instead of upper 20s, which it was not long ago. We are ripping the American dream out of the hands of our kids and our grandkids because of people in this chamber and people in the other chamber who refuse to do the hard work of governing responsibly. I should say representing, we don't govern, but doing our job. I am blessed to be alive. I'm a cancer survivor. Talked about that before. Was blessed to have treatment at MD Anderson, and that was, what year is this? That was 14 years ago. I think 14 years ago this next month. And why do I bring that up? Because I get cancer groups that come into my office all the time. Speaker, you get cancer groups, you get ALS groups, you get people who have a heart to solve a problem, and they want money. They want funding. I have to say no. If they don't come in and say, well, we know that we're $37 trillion in debt, so we're proposing this plan, and we're proposing cuts over here in order to achieve what we want, which is $100 million for some research. They usually don't do that. They just come in and say we need $100 million for research, or $500 million for research, or $1 billion for some program. And I have to say no. But I always say no. I tell my farmers who come in and are just dying for relief because we've messed up their livelihood so much, Congress has, with a failed system. Crop insurance is important. All the things we do is important. But we include a bloated food stamp program, which is exploding off the charts, in the Farm Bill every 5 years. And they expect me to vote to continue a food stamp program, which is often going to the able-bodied, often corrupted, often feeding our children and people in this country sugary, terrible foods that are making our healthcare system more expensive, and they want me to keep paying for that. So I have to tell my farmers, sorry guys, I'm not voting for the Farm Bill. But I got to say, there's only a handful of us in this chamber who are willing to say no. No is the most powerful and important word in the English language when it is used the right way, which I would say in this body should be used most of the time. Ronald Reagan famously said, I think it was in a Johnny Carson late Tonight Show interview, they were talking, and Reagan said, and Reagan hated taxes, Reagan said every new program that a member of Congress brings to the floor should have a tax increase attached to it. He is correct. He was correct. Why? Because if you bring the billion-dollar program to the floor, we vote for it because headline, Chip Roy opposes puppies, right? Chip Roy opposes cancer research. Chip Roy opposes something for veterans or for the elderly. Well, who can vote against that? But if the bill was billion-dollar program, tax increase on every American to pay for it, well, now that vote's a little different. But we don't do that. We never do that. So now what's going to happen? Well, there's going to be a lot of posturing over the next week. Here's something that everybody should get a bit of a chuckle out of. We had to pass the budget right before Easter. We had to pass the bill right before Memorial Day. Now we are supposed to pass the final bill, get it through the Senate by July 4th. We had to pass the government funding bill right before Christmas. Speaker knows. Now, why do you think that is? Do you think that's just because everybody goes, well, wouldn't it be nice to do that right at those great holidays? No. Something called jet fumes. Every member of Congress has a trip. Personal, business, corporate, whatever. I'm not corporate government. They want to go take a trip. So they always want to have these bills right before that. So everybody comes in and goes, yeah, I'll vote for it. Let's get out of them. Boom. They get out of town. So here we are. And over the next week, there's going to be an enormous amount of pressure brought to bear from the White House, from our leadership on both sides, to get in line and to say we got to pass it. If we don't pass it, the taxes are going to go up. If we don't pass it, we're not going to get the border funding. If we don't pass it, we don't have a debt ceiling increase, and oh man, the bond markets are going to freak out. We're not going to default on our debt. We're not going to let taxes go up in the end before this year's over. They don't go up till December. We're going to do what we need to do on the border. I'd like to do it in this bill, but I'm not going to do it in this bill if this bill is adding to the debt, not doing what it needs to do on the Green New scam, not doing what it needs to do on Medicaid, not doing what it needs to do on countless other issues. I'm not going to do it if it's going to be a big giveaway to blue state tax jurisdictions and state and local taxes where they want my friends in this conference who represent big tax states like New York, California. Ooh, they want a bigger deduction for their state taxes. Why the hell should I subsidize their stupid decisions in their states for their expensive taxes? Why should my constituents have to do that? Why should we continue to allow food stamps to go to the able-bodied? Why should we continue to have Medicaid go to the able-bodied and not have work requirements or not deal with the money laundering scam? Why shouldn't we, by the way, have health savings accounts? The Senate bill took our health savings accounts out of the House bill. Why should we continue to have taxpayer-funded sex change operations? The Senate bill puts that back in. Why should we not tax these big university endowments, these universities that are engaging in political activism, taking massive federal money and federal student loan support? Why shouldn't we tax more? The Senate reduces our tax on university endowments to raise revenue by 20%. Why shouldn't we stop China from getting taxpayer dollars through the Green New scam subsidies? Our bill prevented China from getting rich off of our tax dollars. The Senate bill takes it out. Why? Why shouldn't we tax the remittances of illegal aliens sending money back to their home countries? Our bill did that. The Senate bill takes it out. We are at a critical juncture in our history as a country. And the question here is, will Republicans step up and put forward transformational reform when they've got the majority in the House, the majority in the Senate, and they've got the White House? Will we deliver on the president's agenda responsibly? Will we actually take this moment to change the trajectory of debt that's killing our country for our kids and grandkids? Or will we continue the same game of tax cuts for everyone, but spending and more spending for everyone? We can't keep doing the same thing. We can't. I know the American people are frustrated. I know they expect us to deliver. And we must deliver. Failure is not an option. But we shouldn't deliver for the sake of it. We shouldn't pass a bill just to check a box. We shouldn't pass a bill that increases the deficit, doesn't terminate the Green New Scam, doesn't reform Medicaid, doesn't prevent tax subsidies for high state tax jurisdictions, doesn't prevent China from continuing to get subsidies for solar panels with taxpayer dollars, doesn't curb the waste, fraud, and abuse in food stamps, doesn't tax remittances for illegals sending money back home, doesn't include health savings account expansions for the American people, and frankly, even in the House bill, doesn't do enough to reduce deficits. The Senate bill was supposed to make the bill better, not worse. I passed and voted for the House bill to move it along the process for incremental gains and expected the Senate to step up to the plate. And right now, they are striking out. And if they send a bill over that makes this bill worse and adds to the deficit and adds all the things I just talked about, I will vote no. And no, Mr. President, it's not grandstanding. It is not grandstanding to say that you think we ought to be fiscally responsible. It is not grandstanding to say that we should honor the campaign commitment to terminate the Green New Scam in full. It is not grandstanding to say that we should reform Medicaid so that the able-bodied are not being subsidized by the vulnerable. It is not grandstanding. It is not grandstanding. And with that, I'm going to make one final comment, and then I'll save everybody from listening to my destroyed voice. 1 year ago today, Rhonda Massey, wife to my colleague and good friend, Thomas Massey, passed away suddenly. Thomas is a dear friend. Thomas happens to be taking some heat politically because Thomas believes, as I do, we're not doing enough on spending and on the legislation we're talking about. But that's politics. Thomas is thick-skinned. He'll take the arrows. He'll keep representing his constituents. And I believe he'll get reelected, and I'll support him in that endeavor because he's a good man and a good friend. But I just want everyone to know that my friend is hurting today because he lost his wife a year ago suddenly. And my prayers are with Thomas. My prayers are with his family. I know Rhonda's in heaven looking down on Thomas, probably laughing at him a little. But I know my colleagues all want to wish Thomas well. He's a dear friend, and we'll be thinking and praying about him today, even as we go about doing our jobs. And I'm proud to call Thomas a friend, and I'm proud to stand alongside Thomas, and I will stand alongside Thomas as a man of principle who is trying to do the right thing. Don't always agree, but I agree most of the time. God bless him, and God bless the memory of Rhonda and of Thomas's entire family. And with that, I will yield my time back.
The gentleman yields. Pursuant to Clause 13 of Rule 1, the House stands adjourned until 2 p.m. on Monday, June 30th, 2025.